Hello, my name is Tim Brooks and I'm the Director of York Arts Education, the music service for children and young people living in and around the City of York. I'm very pleased to welcome you to this event, Music, Prevention and Youth Justice, as part of the York Festival of Ideas 2021. Our presenters today are Simon Glenister and Sarah Lee. Simon is the founder and CEO of Noise Solutions, a digital youth work organisation. Simon has spent the last 10 years researching, designing and testing approaches to digital youth work, utilising music tech, self-determination theory and digital storytelling. Sarah Lee formed the Irene Taylor Trust Music in Prisons in the 1990s, where she has held the role of artistic director since 1995, developing, supporting and delivering the organisation's work with prisoners, former prisoners and young people on the fringes of the criminal justice system. Following their presentations, Simon and Sarah will join me for a wider discussion on youth justice in the context of music. Also joining us for this discussion will be Dr. Kate Brown, who is a senior lecturer in social policy and criminology at the University of York. Her research explores how vulnerability is lived, governed and understood. She is especially interested in how welfare and criminal justice interventions shape the lives of vulnerable people. So please, can I welcome Simon Glenister, who is going to do our first presentation.
Thank you very much, Tim. Much appreciated. Right, so I'm going to start by giving you a little bit of context about where Noise Solutions work has come from. My background is as somebody who worked within local government teams like youth offending teams, working with vulnerable young people in challenging circumstances. And that's work that I did for many, many years. Often on a one-to-one basis, working with young people facing homelessness issues, addiction challenges, trying to help people get into education, employment, training, those kind of roles. And there was lots of that work that was fantastic, and lots of it that I really didn't think was fantastic as well. For example, the stuff that worked, the stuff that I found was really, really impactful when engaging young people, was to create spaces where they felt they were good at something. It's a pretty simple thing, but that was often hugely impactful, especially when you manage to sort of celebrate that new success and involve the people around that young person in that new success. So leveraging the thoughts and words and actions of the people around the participant as they discovered a new part of themselves was really impactful. What didn't work so well was I found within those local government mental health, education, social services, kind of interventions with young people, often, and I believe this is still the case, there's often a very, very sort of definite focus on deficits and problems. And I think this often amplifies those issues as well. And I'm going to come into the research that I've done that makes me think that in a little bit. Essentially, what we do is work with young people on very, very negative trajectories. So we're working with young people referred from mental health teams who are excluded from school, dealing with anxiety, dealing with depression, emotional, behavioral issues, kids who've just come out of prison. And we are pairing them with a music producer. And there's a bunch of reasons why that's useful. I think first and foremost, the fact that you're presenting as a musician rather than presenting as a social worker or a care coordinator makes you a lot less threatening. It overcomes all of those power imbalances that you often have when you present as a figure of authority, especially to young people who have often been involved in services cyclically and have been overpromised to and underdelivered to. So there's something around the engagement that a musician presents, both for the participant, the young person, but also the family around them, that I think is really, really useful. And we make music with them. And most importantly, we make whatever music they want to make. We're not doing music at them. It's very much a with them process. And it's often revolving around beat making and electronically driven music. It's not exclusively, it's driven by their interests, but that's often the focus. And then while we're doing that, we are capturing that process, that mentoring journey as they discover this new strength in themselves. And we're capturing that digitally, and we're sharing that with the family. And the key workers as well, safely. And I'll show you what that looks like in a bit. However, as an organization, I don't actually think of us as a music organization at all. What I actually think we do is focus on well-being. It's very, very much what the organization orientates itself around. And the reason we're interested in well-being is because when we genuinely impact on it, it does this. If we can say if we can prove that we're impacting on well-being, what you'll see and what the evidence tells us unequivocally again and again and again and again is that, improvements in well-being will lead to improvements in engagement, improvements in education outcomes, improvement in health outcomes, improvement in social outcomes. All the things we are trying to do when we're working with these young people, whether you're working in mental health or education or social services, whatever it might be. Improving well-being solves a lot of the challenges that we see and has significant impacts on the life chances of the young people that we work with. In terms of, the underlying evidence and the theoretical lens that we use to understand our impact on well-being, I was very, very lucky. About 4 years ago, I was invited by Professor Pam Bernard at Cambridge University to go and do a 2-year research master's looking at well-being within a digital youth work context, essentially looking at the work Noise Solution does, looking at finding out how best we impact on well-being, understanding that, looking at how we measure the impact of what we do. How do we properly measure impacts on well-being, which is quite a nebulous term, well-being, for lots of people. But actually, there's lots of really, really great research. And one of the most useful bits of research that I came across was this self-determination theory, which is arguably one of the world's most well-evidenced, empirically evidenced understandings and frameworks of how to impact on well-being and motivation. And this is the lens that we use for all the work at Noise Solution. It underpins everything. It's like letters through rock for our organization. It's how we work with young people. It's how we communicate with family and professionals. It's how we build the digital infrastructure of the work that we do. And essentially, these two guys, DC and Ryan, about 40 years ago, started trying to answer the question, how do we impact on intrinsic motivation? How do we engage people better? How do we shift them along the spectrum from sort of amotivation and being demotivated, which is often where the young people we work with are, and shift them towards intrinsic motivation, to be excited to engage with the world. That's kind of what we're aiming at. That's the ideal. And what they have proven again and again and again with hundreds of thousands of academic teams around the world is that there are actually 3 things we need to focus on. psychological needs to enable people to flourish in terms of well-being and motivation. The first of these is giving people a sense of autonomy. People need to have a sense of volitional choice in whatever they're experiencing. They need to feel a sense of competence, that they have something to contribute, that they don't feel incompetent. How demotivating is that when we feel incompetent? And they also need to feel connected to other people, to feel that they matter, or to know that other people know that they think they matter. Okay, and if you line these three things up, you get this sweet spot in the middle, where you see the shift in motivation and rise in well-being. And if we improve on well-being, we know we get those better outcomes around health, education, engagement, all those things we're trying to do. Okay, so that's a very brief run through of the theory of what we do. In terms of how that actually looks and how we map that onto what Noise Solution does. So first, our musicians are encultured to be autonomy supportive. That's that piece around doing music with them, at them, not pretending to be experts in whatever their type of music is, but going with them on a journey and supporting them in making whatever it is that they're interested in. So it's very, very culturally responsive to the interests of that young person. We normally see the young person for 20 hours. And that might be in the home or a recording studio or both, or it could be entirely digital. Over the last year, we've delivered something like 1,900 hours of online digital mentoring, one-to-one mentoring, interactively with young people. Actually, let me show you what that looks like, just so you get an idea. Here's a very, very short clip of one of our music producers working with a young person.
Are you ready to try out the new mic?
Yeah. Which beat is this?
This is the hip hop one.
Ah, cool.
So this is the hip hop one. We can try the grime one, not the grime, the drill one straight after if you want.
Yeah.
Cool. All right then. Let's do this.
Aye. Hip-hop, listen. It's still gonna be off beat though.
It don't matter, man. Just do your thing, innit?
Nah, I'm tired and I'm restless. Everybody out here,
you get the idea. But what we're doing there is allowing that young person to autonomously decide what they want to create and making them experience that autonomy, and then also making sort of creating this sense of competency as they put those tracks together, write their lyrics, whatever it might be. But yeah, those are those first two elements, those psychological needs, autonomy and competence. The third area where I think we are slightly different from lots of organizations is that we've also built our own cloud-based platform that allows the musician and the participant to capture their moments of success within each sessions, and video reflections around how they feel about the process as well. And those are posted in a feed. Like any other social media platform, it's safe and it's secure. And the young person invites in to that feed the significant adults that they want to be seen by. So parents, carers, social workers, mental health workers, whoever it might be. And at the end of every session, a notification goes out to those adults, an email, and it says, come and check out Jane or Jim's session today, and they can comment on it like they can any other social media platform. What we're doing is taking and capturing competence digitally for that young person, taking it outside of their head, externalizing it for them so they can see themselves being good at something, and then reinforcing those messages of competence so they can internalize them by receiving messages from the adults that they perceive as significant in their life. So I am going to very quickly play you another short 4-minute film about what that actually looks like.
Noise Solution is a top 100 performing UK social enterprise, a digital youth work organisation that to date, since March, has delivered over 1,700 hours of interactive, online, one-to-one music mentoring with vulnerable youth over lockdown. I wanted to catch people up on how our digital developments are helping us achieve this. In this video, we're going to hear from a participant and a parent about their experiences of our cloud-based platform. After that, we'll look at how we've developed that single cloud-based platform for every digital need the organisation has, and we'll briefly look at how our digital cloud helps us track the impact of all that we do. Phew, pretty ambitious for a few minutes. Every participant Noise Solution is referred is paired with a music mentor, where together they co-design a music project. We help them make whatever music they want to. Every session, whether online or face-to-face, participant and musician use a variety of technology to experience quick wins in creating their chosen genre. During each session, the digital highlights of that week's music mentoring journey are captured, and after the session, they are automatically shared safely, digitally, in their own private Noise Solution story, where family members and key workers are encouraged to comment. If you want to find out why this is useful, head to the website and look at our video on self-determination theory. Here's a quick participant and parent reflection of their experiences of this process.
Noise Solution began with Simon, my tutor, coming to my house, and we just sort of sat down and he spoke to me about what it is I like about music and what I want to do. Then we began working with the MIDI keyboards and stuff just to sort of mess around and jam. Really had a nice time. Like that to me, that was just like hanging out with friends. Sharing those videos was really important to me. And my mum, she was really almost surprised but happy to be able to see where I am at, because I feel that those videos are a much better measure of my mental well-being than me coming home from work and not doing the dishwasher. It's just so important to me that she sees that.
I really enjoyed watching the videos. I found them sort of a bit eye-opening, really. You know, often he doesn't share information with me. He's not terribly open. I'm sure other teenagers are the same. It's part of the process of actually growing up and kind of cutting that umbilical cord. And I expected that. But when I actually watched the videos, it sort of helped me kind of understand a bit more about where he was at. I was really amazed at seeing him smile and laugh and joke about, you know, because those are the things that kind of got a bit lost when he was quite poorly.
So there's a whole bunch of stuff digitally going on behind that intervention. And I think it's really important to talk about that and the processes and how we take this theoretical lens of psychological needs, autonomy, competence, and relatedness, and how we try and use digital tools to make those things flourish. And that's what those stories are doing. They're capturing new narratives about kids, projecting them onto the screens of the adults that they care about, and changing conversations and perceptions of that young kid around them. But we also need to measure impact as well. We've got these beautiful qualitative case studies created by young people with their voice right at the center of them, genuine user voice of them reflecting on their experience as they progress through it. But we need quantitative data as well. And the digital platform allows the young person to capture nationally benchmarkable NHS wellbeing data within it as well. So as well as contributing these stories, these qualitative stories, every participant is also contributing benchmarkable wellbeing data as well. And that's just one of the many, many, many things that the platform is doing, as well as dealing with safeguarding and all sorts of other stuff that I'll maybe get to in a minute. I might not have time. In terms of what we use to measure wellbeing, so SDT, self-determination theory, says if we focus on autonomy, competence, and relatedness, we improve well-being. We need to find a tool to measure well-being. The one we happen to use is the Warwick and Edinburgh Wellbeing Scale. There's no perfect way to do this. There just isn't. These are subjective reflections on well-being. However, the Warwick and Edinburgh tool is very positively framed, which suits our organisation. And also it's been used massively. It's had something like 60,000 responses collated from lots of different organisations across the UK, which means we have a national average well-being score that we can compare against. We're able at scale to determine what low, moderate and high levels of well-being are. There's all sorts of stuff we can extrapolate from it. It allows our analysis of what impact we're having on well-being to be quite sophisticated, really. So if we look here, if we look at it demographically, we can see actually the organisation has significant impact on this age range. And surprisingly, or we were surprised, we're actually twice as impactful with young women as we are with young men. So we get perceived as an organisation that works with young men in hoods making drill music. And we do, and that's great, and we get amazing results doing that. But actually, young women who are kind of internalizing behaviors often and trying to not be noticed, if you give them an opportunity to be creative with technology, that can be massively impactful. All of the digital stuff you've seen, those stories are all held within one cloud-based platform, but that platform has a lot of stuff going on in the background as well. For instance, we're able to track all of those well-being inputs, all that data from every individual. This is like three years of data, I think, where we can see start levels of well-being when people first start the program and compare them to the end levels of well-being. We can also compare against national averages, and we can look at whether this is gender or age, or whether it's delivered digitally or whether it's delivered face-to-face. We can cut and dice this data quite significantly. There's also a whole bunch of statistical analysis going on in the background. I haven't got time to talk about what statistical significance means, but essentially it's about understanding what the probability is that you are going to have an impact. And these kinds of academic methodologies in terms of analyzing statistical data are already built into the platform as well. It's sucking this data live, performing calculations, and letting us understand how effective the intervention is. That platform's also allowing us to do all sorts of other stuff that makes the process more efficient. So as well as performing analysis, it's also measuring attendance and all those bums on seats kinds of bits of data, so we can understand where we are having issues. It's tracking contracts, it's tracking leads coming in. It's just helping us understand where we're working and where we're not working. But again, the most important point is that you've got these stories as well. So this is somebody's feed, somebody I worked with a few months ago, where we're showing and demonstrating the work that they do, capturing their reflections, having these conversations, capturing what they think and feel about the process. And we can link that data, that really rich qualitative data of their experience, with the wellbeing data as well. I think it's also important to note that, that those feelings of SDT, really, really run deeply in the organization. So we've looked at how the back end stuff of the organization can adapt that. So for instance, we are sending out onboarding messages direct automatically. This is a map of automation of what's going on with that platform. When we set somebody up in the system, they're automatically sent emails with video messages explaining what the process is. Musicians are writing reports at the end of every session. Those reports are automatically being emailed to professionals as well, so they are clear what's going on at every point in the process. They're invited into that young person's feed so they can contribute to it and engage with that young person in a way that isn't about deficits, but it's about their positive story. It's doing all that kind of tracking, which is doing a lot of the heavy lifting for the organization. And I think, there's so much more in the back end that I haven't had time to talk about, and I haven't got time to talk about. But it's the efficacy that the genuine use of digital tools has when you're working with these young people in a way of improving communication cannot be overstated. In terms of what the actual impact is for that work, so working with prolific offenders, non-attenders, school phobics, et cetera, we're seeing on average 71% completion over a year, 88% attendance, 40% re-engagement with education, voluntary work, or progressions, re-engagement with teams like mental health teams that they might be working with where they weren't before, because we're shifting levels of motivation. About 80% are continuing with music making. We've had 3 years of consistently, highly statistically significant impact on well-being with that population. And we're seeing just over 60% above or within 2 points of the national average well-being scale. In terms of financial impacts, we were lent a team of 5 data analysts, international data health analysts, and they did an 8-month deep dive on what the financial impact of the work was, with the only caveat being that we would not overstate the claims that we made. We wanted to be really conservative, and that was the only instruction we gave them. Apart from that, it was completely independent, and they were looking at things like days saved by family when kids weren't excluded, and time of services used, all that kind of stuff. And they came back with a 334% savings. So we are tripling any return that the organisation has made within it. That's really a very brief canter through, or gallop even, through the work that we're doing. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to hand over to Sarah Lee, who's the Chief Exec of the Irene Taylor Trust. And I'm going to let her do her presentation as well. So thank you very much for having me, and thank you very much for listening.
Thank you, Simon. I've been privileged to spend all my working life creating music with people in touch with the criminal justice system. And over the decades, I've observed discovery, positivity, and success. The majority of these events have happened away from the public eye, so haven't been lauded by thousands. But each and every one has had a long-lasting and sometimes life-changing impact on those who have experienced them. In the 1980s and 90s, when I worked as a music teacher at Wormwood Scrubs Prison, the governor and staff realised the vital role the arts could play in supporting prisoners through their sentence. The men were engaged, enthused, and committed, which of course spilled over onto the wings. In the Scrubs, all the arts tutors were given the freedom to experiment, which meant the offer was rich, ever-changing, exciting, and rewarding. All the things we know the arts to be. We were encouraged to take things as far as our imaginations and prison security would let us, and there was always a creative project to work on. We'd regularly receive letters from prisoners who had moved on, saying it was the best time they'd had in their lives, never imagining they'd have those times in prison. The arts, and in this instance music, was seen as vital for the well-being of the prisoners and the whole prison community. Unsurprisingly, the education offered in prisons has changed considerably over the years. Little was written about it in the 80s, but at that time, offering a wide variety of educational, vocational, and recreational opportunities to those in custody was a given. Crucially, the arts were embedded within these programs and providing a vital complement to the more traditional subjects. I witnessed how access to the arts gave people the chance to break the cycle, creating new opportunities for themselves and helping them live more productively. What I observe now is quite different. Research shows that societies with higher levels of education and learning tend to be healthier, experience lower crime rates, and greater equality amongst its citizens. This makes education in prisons absolutely key, bearing in mind that a high percentage of those who find themselves in custody have few qualifications, arriving there from often chaotic and unstructured lives. Education enhances prospects, and while no one would dispute the fact that basic skills in English and maths are required for so much that happens in life, if the offer included the arts on a large scale, society would likely see more beneficial results. If education programs offer more variety, people will have more opportunities when they leave prison, whether as work or as hobbies and downtime activities. A broader and more holistic offer would create more all-round human beings. They would not only have the traditional qualifications with which to enter the world, but also the experience of gauging and experimenting with things they might be passionate about, where you come into contact with different people and learn new things which expand your mind. My experience seeing the profound effect music had on the men I worked with in Scrubs gave the Irene Taylor Trust its mission, which is quite simply creating music, transforming futures. Over 25 years, taking part in creative activity via our Music in Prisons projects and our Musician in Residence placements has given thousands of people a lifeline whilst inside, with our Sounding Out programme offering ongoing support to those who wish to continue working with us after their release. Our projects did not set out to create the next big artist. They set out to bring people together, to be inquisitive, to learn, experiment, share, and enjoy.
When did life become so confusing? I didn't realize I was losing. Locked up, locked down on the bus, going round and round.
Fly closest to the ones for my birth stages. Never put my bid on no one, I just turn pages. 18 to 33, those were my worst ages. A lot of friends and I ain't see a third's faces. The one for you that would've come and burst blatant. Who would've known I spit a verse flagrant? Whip white all day, trying to swerve cases. Reminiscing about the days in early B's basement. I call it
It's generally accepted that both listening to and creating music has various positive effects on mood and mental health. And songwriting provides opportunities for expression in a positive and rewarding way. The process can be very validating and can aid in building self-worth. All our projects have the creation of new music at their core. We've created thousands of new and quite brilliant tracks with those we've worked with, yet I've always had a strong feeling that these tangible outputs are not the most important thing which comes out of the activity. At the end of every single project, when we ask people what they thought, whether on a questionnaire or in a focus group, they'll say how great it was to be able to write lyrics or play drums or produce a track or whatever. But very quickly, they follow this up with, I feel so much more confident. I loved working with people. I feel so much happier. It made me forget where I was. I can't remember laughing and smiling so much. For me, whilst I love hearing the music they create, and even more, I enjoy helping them create it, what I really see are the things which are going to have an impact on the way they move through life. And that's how they feel about what they've done, rather than what it was they actually did. Whether having music and the arts available as core subjects in prison works or not is dependent on what you measure success by. The current rates of recidivism and the lack of arts provision in many prisons could mean it's worth giving it a go, as there's nothing to lose. Music and the arts won't have all the answers. No one thing has all the answers. But my experience over the years has shown that it plays an enormous part in people's well-being, their creativity, their contentment and belief in their own abilities. This in turn leads to more cohesion, less fragmentation, wider opportunities, and crucially, more rounded and content human beings who actually have a stake in society. Exactly the same applies when we work in community contexts, either with former prisoners or with youth offending teams. Over the past year, we've all learned how vital the arts are. We've looked to music, to film, and to all forms of creativity to alleviate the pressure of living through a pandemic. Those in prison are no different. Unsurprisingly, it was the arts organisations who were contacted first to see what they could offer to those who might be behind their door for 23 hours a day. Calling these offers distraction packs completely missed the point that it was the arts that was looked to first, as everyone knows the far-reaching benefits they bring and how they support mental wellness. The arts should never be an afterthought, but unfortunately over the years, this wonderful opportunity and experience with so much to offer has in many places become more of an add-on, if it exists at all. Yet since March 2020, the arts has given us all relief as we've listened to music, painted pictures and watched films. They're so often seen as a hobby, but for millions of us, both inside and out, whatever we turned to last year may well have been a lifeline. I've often dreamed about trialling an arts prison where every person is given access to a full range of arts opportunities on a regular basis, and anybody signing up would be paid at a rate equivalent to other prison industries, giving it the respect it deserves. What a fulfilling and beneficial place that would be to serve a sentence. And also it would provide some fascinating research. If an arts prison is a step too far, then we should ensure that arts subjects sit alongside the other offers, recognising and celebrating it for the impact we all know it has. To enable this to happen, funding will need to be made available without questioning what programmes may cost. There needs to be acceptance that not all funding needs to support programme with direct work-related outcomes, as taking care of people's mental health in the first instance can be the best possible start to everyone's route out of the criminal justice sector. Research has shown how taking part in music activities can support various mental health conditions, including depression and trauma, two things which are very visible in both those in and on the fringes of the criminal justice system. Music can help you process emotions and is often cited by participants as something which calms and helps regulate their anxiety. I know music improves mental health, and I'm convinced that all the musicians we work with know why this is. but convincing prisons and governments is not easy. If you were to ask many prisons whether the aim of having music projects was to improve mental health and relations, you might get some blank looks. Whilst there are a number who fully understand the wide-reaching mental and social benefits being around and engaged with music can have, and this is absolutely the reason they have them in their establishments, others look at it as a distraction, which feels to be a negative way at looking at something which, if given respect and funding, would make prison more beneficial and supportive places for people to learn and develop. It seems like the best first step to stabilise people before you start to work with them. And in my opinion and experience, there's no better way of doing this than by using music. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Sarah and Simon. Some fantastic insights there, into some very important insights there into the value of music with young people in the criminal justice system and in prisons. And also, I think we're now moving on to a more broader discussion, and would like to welcome back Dr. Kate Brown. Hi, Kate. And welcome back, Simon, as well, for a much broader discussion on the issues that have been raised so far. So maybe could I ask you, Kate, first, just to kick us off, as we haven't heard from you yet.
Thank you, and thanks very much for having me along today. It was absolutely fascinating to hear both of those presentations, and gave a real flavour of the kind of real fundamentals of what you're doing. And my research focuses on social policy interventions for vulnerable people, including criminal justice intervention. So I was, not at all surprised by a lot of the things that you were talking about, which are arts outcomes, but also general social policy outcomes for vulnerable groups. And I was really struck by how much evidence you've been amassing, really. And obviously you've got that wider body of evidence that really supports the work that you're doing. And one of the things that I wanted to ask you about was about funding, because I wasn't sure about how the work was being funded, and if we're interested in, how these outcomes might be taken and learned from more broadly, then that's one of the first questions that that we'd all be concerned with. But also, because we've got all this evidence about what works, and we know that it is working, then there's this gap, as there so often is. Well, why aren't we doing it? Well, we know that it works, so why haven't we got it together? The UK's got these very low rates of well-being. When you look internationally in all the league tables, we're really poor at well-being. There are these massive changes that are taking place in society that are affecting vulnerable groups. And when we've got this evidence about what works, then there's this frustration with, well, why aren't we doing it? And I would be really interested in what your perspectives were about why we aren't implementing it more widely, and maybe we can have a bit of a more general discussion about that. So we've got these very powerful individual level pieces of evidence, but what about the more general picture for society, if you like?
Shall I start with the funding piece? So Noise Solutions a social enterprise that was set up very much with the idea not to use grant funding and to operate within a contract based form of engagement with local authority, with the NHS, with whoever the customers might be. And because that was the case, what was very, very apparent very, very early on was that we needed to show efficacy. We had to solve a problem for somebody to the point where they were prepared to pay for it. And that's very, very much what our journey around impact capture and analysis has been about. So that's why it's been at the forefront of everything we do. We've been trying to take the woolly out of our arts impact for the last 10 years. Unfortunately, on that journey, I think what became really, really clear to me was there are exceptions, but generally, as a rule, actually, I don't think we've been very good at proving the efficacy of what we do within the art sector at all. In fact, I think we've been really, really poor at it. And I think that's why we're at the back of the queue. That's why we don't have parity with medical interventions. Because the evidence isn't amassed in the same way. It's it's a much more often a case of organizations collecting a few qualitative case studies, okay, which aren't taken seriously for all sorts of methodological reasons, often because they're just not at scale. It's only recently that we're starting to see bigger data pictures appear, and a groundswell of more focus on things like well-being. And I think that's really interesting, because one of the other things that I've seen is organizations focus purely on what they do. So they might focus on knitting or music technology, or as the vehicles, and they focus on that as the thing that's important, and it's not at all. I think we need to take a step back and look at a more universal theory of change based around well-being, because that's the thing we know has these impacts that we're all looking for in terms of social policies. And frameworks, it doesn't have to be this framework, but frameworks like self-determination theory, tell us that what the commonality between all of those projects are places where we're bringing together people and making them feel competent, or giving them a sense of connected and relationships between other people, or giving them a sense of autonomy. Those were the things that I was picking out when Sarah was talking about the outcomes that she was talking about, the work that she was doing. So I don't actually think it's the music, if I'm honest. I'm not saying music isn't important, and I'm not saying music doesn't have all sorts of other really, really significant things about it. There's a reason we've been banging rocks together for 20,000 years, right? There's all sorts of other stuff going on around it. But actually, I think participatory art spaces are spaces where we enable people to feel autonomous and competent and connected to other people, and that's where you see the outcomes. What we need to get better at is collecting data at a scale that can compete with those medical RCT kind of approaches. Not that I'm a big fan of RCTs, but that's another conversation. We need more parity of evidence.
Sarah,
and I
you
could just
up on that question as well.
Yeah, I kind of share the frustration that Kate said at the beginning, and also the things that Simon was saying. We're funded differently to Noise Solutions. We are funded by and large by charitable trusts, also by individuals, and we have a number of contracts as well. I think the thing about research, certainly we find this as an organisation working in criminal justice, is that under the National Criminal Justice Arts Alliance, of which we're a member, we are constantly coming up with different research documents and evaluations to basically answer all the questions that we're always being asked. But it seems a lot of the time that it's a numbers game. And because the kind of work we do, we don't necessarily work with huge, great groups who we stay with for very, very long periods of time, because the nature of youth offending teams and the nature of prisons is not such that you can kind of do longitudinal research with these people, because often the prison service doesn't know where they've gone. So I think numbers has always been a tricky thing, but I think the overriding thing for me is that the arts isn't really given value anywhere. And we look at schools, and it's so much seen just as a hobby, and it's not funded properly outside, it's not funded properly inside, it's not given respect, and yet it brings in so many millions each year, the creative industries. But somehow there's this massive disconnect with actually what the arts does and what it gives us as human beings, and that is never reciprocated in cash.
I think I agree completely. And I think there's also a political element as well, especially at local government and national government levels that play into this. We've done extensive work on social return on investment, right? I know we're tripling any money that comes into the organisation, and you would think that would be a license to print outcomes. but politics gets in the way. I've sat in conversations with commissioning leads at local authority and CCG level where they've gone, yeah, the work's amazing, the frontline teams love you, we know you're saving us money, it's fantastic, the outcomes are astonishing, you're transforming kids' lives, the families love it, you're involving everybody in the process, the communication's amazing, but I've got this team of social workers over here that if we fund you properly, we've got to sack.
That's right.
And then that's it, decision made. Can't politically be seen to do that, even if our outcomes are actually probably better.
I think that there's something really interesting. What the interventions have in common is that they're highly targeted interventions. So even though, Simon, you're saying, oh, we're not a deficit model, the funding model is deficit based. So if you look at how it's being funded, what we're seeing more generally in recent decades is a move away from universal provision towards a more targeted provision based that's targeted at people who are deemed to be a problem or are at risk in some way, whether that's youth justice, criminal justice, or just generally, people who are involved in social care interventions. And so it's almost like the interventions get more and more critical end. They get pushed more and more critical end. And then, this panel's, if we're thinking about prevention, you can think about prevention like that, which is increasingly how it is thought of. You do your return on investment, you can show that you get better outcomes. But what about that wider sense of prevention that isn't so commonly thought about, which you're talking about more when you're talking about access to the arts more generally? Who has access to the arts more generally, and what would it mean to live in a society where people did have more access to the arts? Would there be such a need for these range of targeted interventions in the first instance? And then that we see in other societies, for example, where there is more access to the arts, we see that there are less of these targeted interventions. Some of the Scandinavian countries, for example, they also have in common, don't they, very different approach to prisons, somewhere like Norway. And I couldn't help but think about that, Sarah, when you were talking about your idea for a prison. In the UK, we don't really know what prison's for. We haven't decided whether it's about rehabilitation or about punishment. We don't really have an ethos for what prison's supposed to be for. So how are we supposed to have an ethos about what arts work we should do with prisoners? And so I think there's something that I think is really important about the universal and the targeted. And you can have the world's most amazing targeted interventions, but that doesn't necessarily mean that in general we're moving in the right direction when we invest in them, because of course investment can be much wider, and return on investment, if we see it in that kind of very financial way, can be thought about in those broader terms. And I think we're all thinking about it in those terms, and things that you're saying are touching on those themes. But I just wanted to push that point a bit more about the way that we can understand social interventions and their place in society.
I think there's also a question around whether yes, we're helping individuals, we know that, but are we actually providing the sticking plaster that allows the status quo to carry on as well as social enterprises? I think, I would very, very happily, work with a generation of young people to the point where we do ourselves out of a job, where they don't then, through issues around trauma or life experience, create the same as the next generation. If we could do that, amazing. That would be fantastic. But again, that has to be politically led. And if we know that the arts works, yet we still have a situation where, higher education just announced that they're going to have a 50% cut. Where does that leave us? It's not, you're right, Sarah, it's not valued. Even in the face of all of the evidence, and that's ideological.
Could I just intervene and ask a question? Is that everything that you said in your presentation, Simon, everything that you said in your presentation, Sarah, as well, I agree. You could apply it to the general population. You could apply it to education right across the board with the arts. And how much does anybody feel that the arts are not misunderstood or sidelined, but the arts are actually quite very well understood and actually feared in what they can create in a population, where you actually have a tool where you can create a situation where people start to think more for themselves, feel much more connected. You can alleviate problems of social care, mental health issues, which actually politically are quite strong tools to control a population. I mean, I don't want to get onto a pandemic at the moment, but we are all subject to some very stringent, isolating rules at the moment, which are quite powerful. So, if you can understand the thrust that I'm coming to, is that how much political feeling is there where the arts are sidelined because of the power that they have, not because it's misunderstood.
Yeah, I mean, I know what I think, but I mean, Sarah, have you got anything you want to add?
Yeah, Tim, I think you're absolutely right. And it is the element of control, isn't it? Because the thing about the arts is it frees things and it gives people, choice, and you can make decisions. And it might be a scary thing. I don't know. Maybe we're giving politics too much kudos here and thinking that they would actually think about that. I don't know if they would, but you are absolutely right. The arts is the most beautiful, wonderful thing to help you open your mind and do things like that. And of course, once you do that, you start to question other things as well. And then that's where the control that people need over people's lives, as you so accurately just described, that's when the problem starts. So if they do think about it, maybe that's it. I don't know, but I'm not sure I'd credit anybody with thinking about it like that. I just think that it feels very elitist, and it makes me very sad that I suppose that so many people are privileged enough to be able to access it at any time on any scale. They can afford it. They've got all the opportunities to go and do all the things that they want to do. And yet there are people, and certainly the people that we work with and the people that Simon works with are the people for whom it really, really does make a difference. And it's those people that should be being brought up to join the others so they feel happy enough to go and watch a gig or sit in a concert or just do anything that possibly now they feel they can't.
I mean, I think I generally very much subscribe to the cock-up theory rather than the conspiracy theory view of the world. And I don't actually give them too much credit. But having said that, what we're seeing with things like Gavin Williamson's announcement about the higher education thing, that's straight out of Trump's culture war 101 playbook. That's about dividing people and setting one against the other. And that's pretty transparent. I don't think it's very sophisticated. Again, I really don't want to give them that much credit, but yeah, that's what I see happening.
Maybe as just as a final question, as we're getting quite close to the end of this panel discussion, is I believe everything you've said. We all believe everything you've said. We all agree with it. I would imagine that the vast majority of the people who are watching this program will also agree. Who do we need to be have advocacy in our sites? Who do we need to be talking to? Otherwise, we have the danger that we're always preaching to the converted. Who do we need to be speaking to actually get people to truly understand the value of what it is we are doing and the value that it has on people's lives?
It's a great question.
I think we are talking to them, but I don't think they're listening, and that's the difficulty. I think we're invited to speak to all manner of people about what we do, and that we're just there because they think it's the right thing to do to have an arts organisation or a criminal justice organisation at the table. But then you think to yourself, well, no, you have to be brave. Somebody has to be brave. They have to stop following the pack and they have to stand up and be counted and just say, You know, we do it. Like I said when I was talking, you know, it feels very much to me as though nothing else is working. So why not give it a go? What's the worst that can happen? You get a happy, much happier community. You get people that feel fulfilled and creatively nourished. I mean, I goodness knows, who knows?
I think it's about finding the right people to talk to, the ones that are prepared to take a chance. So, for instance, when I say that, I'm thinking specifically. So we're involved in locally quite in-depth collaboration with the CCG, who are funding the NHS services, mental health services, and you know, within Suffolk, where we're based, that leadership team unusually have very, very much encouraged the third sector to become, or take the first steps of becoming equal partners in that health framework, where we genuinely have a voice at the table, where we can feed into all sorts of things. It's very, very early days. And the latest government paper is possibly about to blow it out of the water. But, you know, nonetheless, the point is the third sector, by that I mean charity, social enterprise, whatever it might be, we are not presenting ourselves cap in hand. We are being as equally professional and seeing ourselves as equally valued, and not being the poor partner anymore, and being quite bolshy about it, actually. And I think that's been really, really successful, and started to change perceptions. If you look at the third sector in Suffolk, I think, what were the figures? It was something like 250 million income, 12,000 people employed. You know, these are serious figures. And I think we need to, you know, be more cohesive in our messaging around that, to again ramp up this parity with medical services, because we're getting the same outcomes, often better outcomes. That's why there's been this push around social prescribing. I mean, not very well handled, obviously. You know, you wouldn't think it would take a genius to think, well, actually, we've got to pay these services to deliver these, rather than just fund a whole bunch of people to point people at art services and go, oh, can you do it for free? But that's another conversation. But yeah, I think the third sector needs to step up as well, and start being more bolshy about it and going, actually, no, you need to take us more seriously.
Yeah, I think what I'd say, that the third sector is vitally important. You know, I've spent I've worked for a long time in the third sector before working in universities, and it's so important, but it's also, it is part of that sticking plaster that you mentioned, Simon. And I think more broadly, we need to think beyond that sticking plaster approach, think about organising locally, and beyond a kind of beyond a kind of commissioning local authority framework, but getting people doing things, and, you know, trying to forge bonds in our communities that have been eroded by decades of the stripping out of essential services that support all of those community bonds. And so I think organising, I'm biased, but I live with a person who organises gigs and music, and that starts something and creates bonds and conversations. But then also the questions that we've talked about are political ones, and it's political organisation. If we want to see these types of approaches to the arts and approaches to social interventions that are different, then that's a question of political organisation, as well as those other forms of organisation and structures that we've talked about. And I think thinking about the sort of future that we want, I do think that I teach in universities and I teach social policy, criminology, and I think things are changing with young people, and they are having those conversations now about the way that COVID, they can see the way that the state affects their lives, and they can see that things aren't right in the society that they live in, where they're not going to be able to go to university to study what they want and buy a house and participate in the things that you talked about, today in terms of just having access to the day-to-day things that make us feel okay. And young people are starting to question that, as some young people are. And so I think things are changing, and we've got to get on board and kind of help them along their way in the organising that we're doing. Yeah, that's what I'd say to that question.
I think on that positive note, I think we'll wind it up there. And I think the go away with the idea that things are changing. We're thinking about the future and wishing everybody their best in the fantastic work that they're doing, and the fantastic work that a lot of people are doing who will be watching this program, and also to take it to the right people. And as Simon said, not be afraid to really be advocates of our own great work. So I'd like to say a big thanks to Simon Glenister, Sarah Lee, and Dr. Kate Brown for taking part in this discussion. Thank you very much. And just to remind you all, the recording of this event will be available on the festival YouTube channel, which can be accessed from the Watch Again section of the festival website. Thank you to everybody for taking part. Goodbye.
Thank you.